So that does want to, so if it asks you or tells you it's been recorded, just hit okay or got it or whatever it asks you. But this way, if you can't join, they can watch the meeting afterwards. And so we have, okay, Maxine's gonna start us off with a joke, right?
No, I'm going to start off to tell, I'll do that last.
Okay.
But first of all, I want you all to know that we bought video equipment, and what we're looking for now is a videographer, someone to help us, someone who will learn how to use this wonderful equipment we're getting so that we can keep meeting online and maybe someday in person. So please volunteer to be a videographer.
And our professional will teach us all how to use it all at the same time and show us here at Bobby Beat how to do it. So
right. And so we've had several people joining, and so you can look on the website and see who the new members are, and maybe you even know them. So I'm going to ask Becky to talk about the state fair, and then you can come back to me and I'll tell you a joke.
Okay.
Our state fair demonstration day is August 31st. And I'm looking for 3 people at each of the 4 times. It would be 9 to 11, 11 to 1, 1 to 3, and 3 to 5 to demonstrate and talk to people about our group so that we can maybe get new members. And you can email me. I won't be home tomorrow, but the day after I'll be home. It's bpancakebeads@gmail.com if you don't have it. And the other thing I want to say is we do have the display case, and it's not part of the state fair where it's judged. Our theme is Beads Connect Us, and we haven't had anyone turn in pictures yet. I do realize it's a ways away yet, but I'm encouraging you to make something that shows a connection. Thank you.
One piece that got turned in, they didn't turn in a picture, she turned in the piece.
Okay, great.
Good.
So
We got to
yes,
start.
that's turned in a piece, yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will tell you a joke and then the meeting will roll on. So I don't know, you ladies are so young, and you too, Perry.
I'm not that young anymore.
Sophie Tucker said that what a woman needs is, up to the age of 18, she needs good parents. From 18 to 35, she needs good looks. From 35 to 55, she needs a good personality. And from 55 on, she needs cash. So that's my joke for the evening. Enjoy. Glad you're here, Perry.
Thank you. And does that mean I start now, or?
Basically we have one more announcement.
Okay.
That if anybody, like I said, that you would like to turn in your rocks, or we're going to, Chris Allen will be collecting the rocks soon for the Beaded Rock Sculpture Project, so we can have our first rock garden art installation, photo taking, picture taking. So then if you want to turn in your rocks, you can turn them in to Bobby Bead, and I will display them here until Chris comes and picks them up, or else you can mail them down to Chris. So either way, we want to start getting our art installation going. We are going to show off them quite a few places, also at the state fair, and then hopefully end up at the Rochester Art Center as well, in a little installation. So these rocks are going to go all kinds of places and be used for all kinds of things. So please make your rock and turn it in. And if you want to turn in your state fair thing early, you could send the pictures in, but if you want us to display it before the fair, we will at Bobby Beads. So you're more than welcome to turn it in here too, and I will show it off for you. And then I also want to thank our member Hannah of my programming committee, and she's helped us to book Perry in, and she's got help to book in the whole rest of the year as well. She took all your advice on some of the people you wanted to see, and then we went and contacted them. So look at the UMBS website to see who the Monday night people are for the entire rest of the year. We've got our calendar booked in. And so, but we do want our teachers for our Saturday Let's Bead Lives. So once again, we put out a questionnaire on the Upper Midwest Bead Society private Facebook page for you to fill in.
On the group. It's not on the page, it's on the group.
It's on the group, private group, sorry, about what you want to see and learn on our Let's Bead Live. We have covered so much this last 2 years. Before we start overlapping things, we'd like to finish covering the topics you want to hear about and learn about. So please give us your suggestions, vote for things we've already done so that we can help book in teachers for our Let's Bead Live Saturdays, or if you would like to teach, please contact us to volunteer so that we can get you booked in to teach. Or if you want to have a workshop, we can book you in for workshops anytime throughout the year. So those are special and different. So we want to make sure we got everybody covered and get everybody continually beading. So other than that, Hannah, do you have any more announcements?
No, I don't. I think we should introduce dear Perry and he can take over.
So then would you like to say a few words about how you know Perry?
Well, I know Perry from Bead and Button, and so he was one of the first people that I thought of when we were talking about speakers, because Perry knows more about beads than any of us put together, and he has forgotten more about, don't be mild, Perry. He's forgotten more about beads than any of us will ever know. So he's agreed to speak to us today, and I can't wait to hear it.
Yay.
Well, thank you. Well, the first question that Hannah was telling me about was wanting to hear your story, like how you grew up in beads. So I think that's where I'm going to start, like how it sort of started. First, our company was called York Novelty Import. Later, as the internet advanced, we were, slanging York Beads because that was our domain name. We were formed by my grandfather, Saul Bookstein, and his partner, Boris Weissman, in 1924. They were both Russian immigrants. They must have come, not everything's exact, they must have come, when they were 8, 9, 10 years old. They got their first jobs in the garment district. And it was with other importers, and somehow the fact that they were aggressive enough and they spoke Russian was very key, because they somehow they were able to start business together. Probably how business was those days, jobbing merchandise. Jobbing was basically calling somebody else 4 blocks away for merchandise and supplying your shop, because those days, remember, there was no Google. Even the yellow pages were ineffective. And they put they went they put together enough money, and they went to Czech Republic, and they spoke Russian so they could really communicate when they were there. And just somehow the way the whole timing of everything went, and when World War II started, which shut things down for a bit, they were just able to get one of the exclusive import licenses from the Czech Republic. Basically, it was we were located on 37th Street, Midtown Manhattan, between 5th and 6th Avenue, and between, let's just say, 36th and 38th Street. Between those avenues, there were importers named like Margola, Elliott Green, Harmon Beads, who's still around, but Harmon I think no longer has the place there. Fred Franklin Sons, which was a trimming company, Mare Import, who was one of the few last to leave, and so forth. So there was, one of the strange things about Czech when, my last hooray in the bead business was how at Beadsmith, how we talked about how everyone knew everybody. It was a very small knit industry. In the same vein, everyone knew everyone, and the fact is, a lot of people know Elliot. Do a lot of people know who Elliot Green is? The company Elliot Green. Have they heard that? Elliot Green was one of the more famous bead importers, mainly because they were sea bead oriented. They themed themselves around Native American work. I mean, really, Native American work was one of the big dominant factors that made seed beading in America, and importing, what it was, brought volume to the marketplace. But they were also I don't know if they were the inventor of the Charlotte, as per se, that they were the sole importer of the Charlotte bead from when I started, which was 1987, through until the mid 90s, when things started breaking apart some more. So our company, had this big advantage because we were the sole importer, which was great because you could import from what was a much smaller selection of beads, meaning, black and white and fire polish and your seed bead variety, but there was not it was very hard to go into tangents because you had to order in much more, minimum quantities, 100 kilo at a time to hundreds of mass at a time. And you were also ordering this because you knew, based on the communist rule, that you were only getting a couple shipments a year. I mean, there were ways to complain and to maneuver, but it was much more, okay, you are a vendor, this is what we're offering you, and you have to work with it. And it was a very it was great when obviously the right jewelry fashion came into play, when bohemian necklaces were big, and you were one of the companies that had black fire polish beads. There was always a run. It was always a fashion run for it. But one of the big dilemmas, because I know you guys are all here mainly probably because of your love for seed beadings and loves for stitches and so forth and so on. When I came into the business the first few years, I mean, everything was fashion oriented. I mean, we had customers on the block like Liz Claiborne and Ralph Lauren and Miriam Haskell. Those are names perhaps you heard. There were other probably smaller names like Catherine Stein and, oh gosh, trying to remember different ones. 1928 Jewelry, who is still around, was a big customer. So a lot of our advantage with all that information I gave you about how we got our import chip, and we're one of like 8 companies, sort of, people relied on us to get the fire polish beads, and they didn't bother go looking for them. There was no, Marlene's in Czech Republic, there was no knocking on the door at Preciosa or Albonix and saying, can I come in, because it was communist. It was a little bit scary. We'll get into that later. And we just sort of had this advantage. And me, I came from a background really growing up where my dad, maybe around the ages of 10 or 12, would have me come in the office Christmas time. We had a Woolworth was our customer, and he used to send me with the workers in the back room. Remember, this is New York City, so a back room was literally a back room. And, we didn't have much machinery or anything, and he had me helping out putting wooden beads into a plastic bag, putting the overlap Woolworth overlap label on it for Woolworths, and we were putting these orders together. Would it be for hair beads or something or other? It was really one of the first things they do. They would buy me, I was 10 or whatever, they would buy me Twinkies or cupcakes or something, and I would eat and have fun. But I think one of the major influences early on was the trade beads, because the trade beads were just fascinating. I guess one of the strange things that happened is these African traders would come on the block in 37th Street, always looking to dump their merchandise, which were beads, which were collected probably years earlier, 60s, 70s, for wedding. I brought these stories out, wedding and very much tribal and very, I think, meant a lot of wealth in say Kenya or the surrounding areas. And as time went on, the beads perhaps lost their value because I was told as a kid that these beads were worth money. I mean, actual money. And these little Millefiori elbows like I'm wearing, it was just sort of fascinating to me because they were so colorful and so intricate, and everyone was different. And my dad's telling me they have a monetary they have a monetary value, which in the end, I sort of learned everyone, I suppose, heard the term trade beads, but I suppose it means something to everybody else. But for me, back in those days, we would buy these, these typical African strands of trade beads. I remember $7, $8 a strand. We buy them in boxes we tend to buy all they have early on until the quality went down. And we buy 100 strings at a time, maybe 200, maybe they only have 50. And there was a couple of emerging markets here early on. There was like a Ralph Lauren blue jeans look, I think, which the more advanced hippie look, more culture hippie look. And then there was also the so-called, more hippie Woodstock, Grateful Dead market, because I can remember toward the end of the trade bead boom, as way I saw it in New York, we had customers like Terrapin Station, which I knew music, pop music, a little bit rock, but I didn't know Grateful Dead very well at the time. And they're pretty much where people were buying, toward the end, people were buying beads, buying the trade beads out from us and just going to the Grateful Dead concerts with them and selling them in the parking lot. So the weird thing about the bead business in Manhattan was you had customers like that, hippies per se. You had the Liz Claibornes and the like, and the Ralph Lauren's. Then you had all these bead stores, which were starting to open up, especially on the West Coast. So we had a very mixed clientele in that respect. And as far as like a jewelry account, I mean, they were very, very time consuming, and you could put, they just, their orders had to be precise, so you could only handle so many of them. The great thing about the bead stores and the hobbyists was, they could walk in anytime, buy what they wanted. You could be out of stock on something. Obviously, you didn't have to worry about having certain things. For them, it was obviously the other people were relying on glass pearls and fire polish beads, and then got more intricate later on. So we had this sort of potpourri where I used to tell somebody, like, there was no need, people would say, why don't you go to bead shows? Because I said there was no need. We had it all here on 37th Street. And the reason I say that, because you'd have a Swarovski dealer over at that building on that floor, or you'd have a Preciosa stone dealer on that floor, or you'd have a trimmings dealer over there. So within that dynamic, even if we had a customer coming to us and saying they wanted Swarovski, they didn't know where to get it, we could find it for them. There was a lot of that going on. You did not have to stock everything. I mean, obviously Manhattan, you're living off of a smaller space. Even if and we did own the building. My grandfather bought the building in 1950 after starting in 1924. So like I told you before, I mean, having that Czech so-called dealership, in communist era was amazing. I mean, how to deal with it and the struggles of the time seemed like a lot then, but I mean, having the dealership and the opportunity was just an amazing, amazing experience. So what happened though and I guess one of the points I want to bring out, we have the fashion industry, which is basically you're chasing some designer's whim. They want the speed and they want a lot of they want, and therefore, and then you have the craft industry. And most of you are crafters, and I guess a great thing about a crafter is, although you want the delicate beads, and I know you want the precise beads, we pretty much can give you anything and you're going to make something out of it. While the fashion people are looking for whatever the look of the time is. Obviously, the hippie area or the bohemian styles were the big money makers for us. But we would be, we were pretty much in a lot of ways chasers. I mean, we were chasing down the color or chasing down, whatever the fashion of the moment was. And even though when I started, the first trade show I went to was called HIA at the time, Hobby Industries of America, which morphed into CHAA, which is basically the one big hobby show. It was always very often in Anaheim, sometimes in Dallas. And I remember the first year in 1987, there we have a pearl knotter. And if it wasn't 1987, it was 1988 was like our big offering at the time. And the major customers were buying probably sea beads, and in some cases, sea beads for us. And we were selling a lot to distributors who were packaging up for the Michael stores of the world. So it was we had a very weird, unique sense of customers, and at the same time, we would get Native Americans coming in looking for beads, or we would, like I said, bead stores, lots of hippies, people from all over the world. I mean, New York, because of the volume in the area, just we had the stock where other places didn't have it. So I graduated from Washington University, St. Louis in 1987, and the first, I suppose I was a bit, knowing I had the family business as a background, I was a bit. I was only like a B- student, so just pretty much not sure where I was going. I figured I'd go into business, and somehow my dad said, well, the B business is waiting for you. And there it was. And I graduated, and one of the first things I did was I went to the Czech Republic in 1987. It was communist run. And the big difference from today, there was no tour buses, there was no everything, you had just the fact that we had someone who was eventually going to greet us and to serve us was the one thing. But there was a lot of waiting around, a lot of big empty rooms, a lot of space, and not a lot of communication. I mean, eventually when you get to meet somebody, they take you into a small room with sample cards, and you spend the time going through the sample cards, and you knew that you were there to work up an order. And if you were lucky, you got to see a few things, but you didn't get to see much. It was very, very much protected. So it was, just to keep it on the short side, it was very, very, very strange. And one of my stories that I would always tell is when I got to the airport the first time, we get on the road, and they picked us up, the company picked us up, we get on the road to the highway to Yablonets, where is it Marlene, where Marlene is, and literally maybe 10 miles in, there are Russian tanks on the road. And my dad goes to me, Perry, I didn't, they're Russian, and you see the Russian tanks, and they got the machine guns. Unfortunately, what's on TV today isn't much different in a lot of ways, and though a different area. And the first thing he says, Perry, I want to teach you one thing. Here's a Russian phrase. His dad spoke Russian. Я сдаюсь. And it meant, what does that mean, Dad? It means I surrender. So he wanted to teach me that phrase. So we're taking this long highway trip to the factories, and the factories are up in the mountains. And really, the communication was very iffy. But late at night, the guys would go out. So my dad, I guess I went home. The guys would go out, and they would drink a lot. So I guess my dad would get some talk out of them. I don't remember much myself. I think I had no business. I had no bead knowledge at the time. I just sort of walked into the whole thing, and it was sort of just surreal. But a couple years later, there was this guy. His last name was Hubble, and it's strange because Hubble ended up being a guy named Hubble ended up being the president of Czech Republic, and there was this one guy named Atta Hubble, And this is about 2 years later, in 1989, and they're starting to open up a little bit. And we go to this like restaurant, and all of a sudden he just starts like telling us things, telling us like just secrets. He's basically telling us, predicting that it's going to break. It's going to break soon. And communism is going to break soon, and we're going to have to, and he was part I think confessing, and part not sure what was going to be, and part was want to make sure he was holding us for as a customer, because everything was government owned. So once everything in the wall broke, anyone who had a private workshop or private factory or private organization, or because Yablonec itself was more like a figurehead. It was one big warehouse and office building that basically collected all the beads from the countryside, the so-called cottage industry market. So it went, it was a big, huge place, somewhat inefficient, but all except for a few major factories, all the small work was done on the countryside. This gentleman Hubble is sort of telling us it's gonna break down. It's just a matter of how we're gonna play the game. And I guess one of the big issues economically with the Czech beads at the time, they were not very expensive. Basic C beads, our biggest seller were 60 or E beads, 60 E beads. They cost a few dollars a kilo. Let's just say a few dollars a kilo. The bigger expense was the transportation, but mainly the duties. There was a 40% duty on Czech merchandise. So you bought something for $4, it immediately cost you $1.60 more, $5.60 plus whatever your transportation expenses were. And that was a big deal right there at that market. And knowing that this wall was going to break was a big, it was like giving my dad a big tip. I was still, pretty wide-eyed, much more learning about the beads themselves. And so we were able to take advantage of that. We were able to just buy whatever inventory we could get while the communist was still quite not broken, put it into what was called bonded warehouse. So basically you're paying for the base of the goods, but you're not paying any of the import taxes until you take it out of the warehouse. So within 2 years, it probably was less, the wall came down, the United States government gave Czech Republic preferred status. So it went from like 40% duty down to a couple percentage points. And all of a sudden we had all these beads. It was not a lot of items per se. It wasn't a lot of variety, but a lot of stock on some items where we got them, fairly good price. So in that itself, there was a lot of loyalty to the Preciosa, it was Yablonec with a C at the end regime, or Yablonec with an X at the end regime. So Yablonec with an X was the name of the government importer. Yablonec with an EC, Nadnisu, which meant Little River, was a small town, and that was the town where Marlene was at. So trying to get my train of thought. So this, suddenly, we had loyalty toward this regime because one, they always controlled the sea beads. Two, they were good to us. I mean, we had all those, I said we started in 1924 till this 1990s came. You weren't going to turn your back. They would do definitely, they would do some advertising for you, et cetera, et cetera. So times are changing. I went to the Czech Republic now, 92, 93, and all of a sudden you get to the airport, and the first thing you see are billboards on the wall, Twix candy bars, the Marlboro Man. I mean, all type, just strange things, because before, my mom used to tell the story that when we were there in 87, you went to a restaurant, they take you to a restaurant. She asked for an iced tea or an iced coffee. They had never heard of such a thing. she like, it took them like a half an hour to convince them to put like ice in the cup and to pour, to pour the coffee or the tea over the ice. And now all of a sudden, years later, I'm talking just just a small amount of years, 5 at max. There's Twix candy bar billboards, there's bowling alleys out of nowhere. People want to travel. There's just a totally different place. There's no more tanks on the road. But they're all of a sudden small business going on, and if I was to say there was a mistake I made over the years, when that small, just knowing the fact that a lot of these small businesses gain access to their old factories again, which were generally pressing factories and fire polish factories, I would have perhaps pursued them more. We had one gentleman, his name was Jaromir Macek, who used to work with the Yablonets, who broke away, and he ended up being like our agent to all these places. And again, it sort of worked out a similar way. I was very loyal. The business was starting to change a lot, where all of a sudden, more people had access to merchandise. The basic black beads and so forth were not going to sell. And all of a sudden you had to decide what you're going to try to produce for yourself, because you had to widen the palette. People always ask, like, why are there so many new two-hole beads that coming out, or so many new beads coming out? And it's mainly the simple economic fact that the old beads aren't selling. People just gravitate to the new, and the jumping over one to the other just became an economic fact, except for when jewelry design deemed it to be otherwise. So as I mentioned to you, I had the gap between the fashion business and the craft business. Now the big change happened was when basically the boom store, especially in California, of beads came, because we didn't even know it was happening in a sense. I mean, it just started out of nowhere. And I think just being able to go to some trade show and out west, we met people, and people would just come out to the New York area just because they needed to get things that they just were not able to get elsewhere. I mean, between all the fashion runs throughout the years, I mean, we had built up beads from Japan and West Germany, India. And so what would happen, I guess, over time, as my Czech expertise grew and my loyalty to Czech grew, I used that as our main business, but we had sort of like these odd lots of, I guess what you guys would call vintage beads, because at that point we were no longer importing of all these just other styles of beads. So I suppose at the same time when we were selling our Czech merchandise, we would offer, a lady would sometimes even get quarters on the phone and say, "Could you send me $100 of purple beads from your collection?" Or if it would be more. And so we would do that type of thing. And somewhere along the line with the shifting from the jewelry business to the craft business, and then obviously the invention of the internet made communication such where obviously the people who were buying these big orders of pearls and fire polish from us, like a 1928 jewelry or a Miriam Haskell, were now not buying from us much anymore. They had much more access to information, people, would it be Asia or elsewhere. So we were really featuring a shift, a really big business shift from major companies. I mean, we even had companies like Walt Disney on our books who were buying beads for costumes, and we had Tandy Leather, who was a Radio Shack company, big in Texas specifically, but they were buying wood beads for leather crafts. I mean, even all these companies were in the same boat. They didn't know, they didn't have the distributorship, or it wasn't worth their time to have a distributorship of certain beads. They were eventually opened up to the internet like everybody else, in the same way the Czechs themselves were opening up the world, their worlds, to being able to travel and leave the country. There was just a big, outpouring of just change. I mean, tremendous change. I mean, I sort of remember this one dilemma I had. This lady was trying to get me to advertise in the Yellow Pages, and I made a mistake. She got me to advertise, and I said, I know this. And I was saying to myself, I know this is a mistake, but I sort of felt like, what do I have to lose? Maybe. So I remember placing this like this Yellow Pages ad, which was, I don't know, $700 a month or whatever it was, and I remember shaking my head afterwards, like, why did I ever do that? Because Google became this huge thing. We used to go to the hotels around the country, get their Yellow Pages out. This is in the early '90s, and you'd find every bead store listed in the Yellow Pages. Every bead, even places you never knew existed. Now, of course, everything sort of is transposed to the Google environment. So the information is totally different. And I mean, that could be a topic on its own. Just the transformation of technology just in the business. But let me just try to keep to the beads themselves. So I started working with this one gentleman named Jaromir Matrek. He was a former, he was educated by the Jablonec people, so he was a former communist, educated, but he was deemed someone, I guess, to be an agent in Czech Republic. Their schooling worked where I guess they took tests, and I guess they chose who went to law school, who went to the medical department, who went into being an import agent, and so forth. So he was deemed an import agent. He loved the products of beads, and we got along. And really, we discussed, what are we going to do now? What's going to be, because now it became very important, talking about all these new beads that were coming now, one after the other. What are we going to make? What new beads are we going to produce? Because we can't rely on just round fire polish anymore. We can't rely, and we still had a sea bead monopoly of a sense. Sea beads were still controlled by Jablonec, but we needed, a lot of these new beads obviously were good advertisements for you, because if you had something you knew and unique, not only would it hopefully bring back from something from the past that they haven't seen in a while, but also it's like everything else. If you have something that no one else has, you hopefully, and just one of the first things we did, and I don't know if anyone can see this. This is just a mock gemstone necklace of Czech fire polish beads that were in the puffed rondelle shape. And it was literally like the first thing we worked on. Now, I'm sure other people had seen the beads from the past, because it's not a very fancy shape, but somehow, hello?
Hi, put your hand behind the bead so that the camera, there you go. Now the camera will be able to go ahead and focus on it. Thank you.
I could get a piece of paper or something. That works?
Nope, that's fine. Thank you.
Yes. So, literally, it started out, I think it was 6x9 was the main shape that we were going to order this rondelle, and then obviously we started with the basic colors, the black and the jewel tones and so forth, and I think we have something here. I mean, and I think it became a very, very big bet as people started imitating it elsewhere, because there's no monopolies in this. Anyone could build a mold. So generally, beads were made by molds. So somewhere in my pictures, there are probably a picture of a mold. Molds are generally two caps, a top cap and a bottom cap, creating a shape. So this is a donut shape, basically a round shape, but a donut shape. And these donut beads were put on they're basically fire polished. They're put on pins, and they're grinded by hand with a machine. And the Czech Republic, the Czech people were wonderful engineers. They knew all about machinery. It probably just came from their history, and they had all these what looked like old and weird machines that could just create effects to the bead. So there was this basically a grinding machine that you just turn by hand that just, as the bead would rotate, would create the facets all around it. And this became like our, I guess, my first signature product once, the wall came down and I was starting to do my big adventures. So once we went through all these basic colors, we said, well, what are we, and then obviously you go through all the coatings. The main coating, I mean, was it was always termed Picasso. Picasso tended to be some type of stone finish, but in Czech they call it travertine. It's some type of a clay coating with a silver oxide that they take the beads and they put it into a clay pot and they mix it up and it takes the beads. These just became really the cornerstone of a certain that boom time for me of, I guess, getting my name out there, trying to learn what can I do to be, an asset to this business, I suppose. But the strange thing is that you had to, things just were not working the same way jewelry wise anymore. I mean, we were doing a lot of mimic of semi-precious beads, I suppose, and semi-precious beads on their own, we were becoming much more accessible and I think much more featured in jewelry. So, I mean, we were really constantly trying to catch up with somewhere caught in between the fashion market and the craft market. It's always been my dilemma in business. I mean, who are you catering toward? Because I was never a sea bead specialist. We were always somewhere in between. I mentioned that company, LA Green, before. They were known to be the sea bead specialists. They were Native American bead based. They had the Charlotte bead. They were the only ones who had the original crow bead at the time, which was the original larger pony bead made from Czech at the time. I mean, there were plastic crow beads and made from India at the time. So there was, it was really like a journey for me because I really was someone, who was willing to go from thing to thing and just see what stuck because that was really a style of mine. But obviously you had constraints. So within this bead alone, we said, well, what do we do next? And we had to come up with our own colors. So basically, my friend Yaromir, he showed me that certain glass beads can be combined. Certain glass based on their chemical and heating nature, when they're made, you combine them, they adhere together and they can be pressed and made like every other beads. There are other colors which you combine them, they just break apart. They break apart. I'm sure pink and purples are a main issue of that because there's always issues in pink and purple. Just a main problem. So in my pictures there with Hannah, there's a lot of pictures there's some pictures of glass cane being in a glass cane factory. I'm going to show you this. This was something I got on the streets of New York, probably, I don't know, 2015. These are all from Preciosa glass cane, where they're generally a solid glass color that's been treated with a certain overlapping of a glass cane over the color to create a look. And this really was the African look. These were all these type of beads are called Mali beads. The wedding garments made in Africa themselves were just it was a big business, but it was a big business for them, but also it was a very cultural business that sort of branched out into fashion over time. When I mentioned before the trade beads and the Ralph Lauren look and the blue jeans, a lot of this stems from tradition, and tradition in countries. This one of the most profound things that was ever told for me, and this was really on my last trip with Beadsmith in 2018. And he was catering to my boss at the time. So now I have a boss, and but I was talking to him, and I was like explaining how I come from a fashion background, and a lot of it's in my time at my old company, New York Novelty, was from a fashion base. And he said, Perry, and this was a guy named Peter Push. He's now like sort of like the face of the Preciosa industry. He was someone who was very much involved in Preciosa buying Yabloneks and what would be the CB business, and sort of keeping it together in one unit. And he said to Perry, we are not a fashion company, Perry. We are a traditional company. We are all about tradition. And he meant by that was, if it would be the Guatemala CB makers or the Panamanian CB people, or would it be the people in China who do bead crafts, or Russia who do the great flowers? They all come from a tradition that just didn't stop. While here in America, what we have was the Native American tradition, which I'm sure you've all seen Native American beadwork at some point. That became an issue because slowly but surely, like how things are changing now, that was starting to get stunted some. Just to go, I'm sorry if I'm going on a tangent, but I guess somehow along the line, when the gambling went to the reservations, it just sort of, and I guess you could say the same with technology now in general. It just sort of changed the focus of everybody, because it just suddenly, Native American CP work, wasn't quite as big of a focus. They had these casinos. I mean, they just had these casinos and so forth. And I had this one story. It was just one of these struggling times. Business was slow, but we knew this one lady who had a bead store in Naples, Florida. She had an Osceola was her last name. I may pronounce it wrong, but it's an Indian last name. And we were always nice to her. We always just had a good relationship as we were dealing with any bead store. But one of these weird times is she comes in one day, and it was strange. Her business wasn't particularly busy, and she comes one day. She was always a moderate buyer, and she starts taking all these beads down from the wall. I mean, like buying everything. What seemed like everything to me. I'm over exaggerating a bit, but it seemed like everything, like out of nowhere. And I guess all of a sudden, I guess her uncle comes in or something. She's with a little bit of a posse. And I remember before, like her spending $1,000 was a lot, a lot. And I said to her, how are you going to pay for all this stuff? And she goes, my uncle owns the Hard Rock Cafe, because they had just bought, the Seminole tribe of Florida had just bought the Hard Rock chain. The Hard Rock chain. I mean, it was a major, those casinos was just a major event for a lot of reasons. I mean, they brought drugs to the reservations. They obviously changed the focus of everything from traditional beading to more modern, be gambling or whatnot. But just it was like the last time they had the Seminole tribe wanted to have a bead store, a museum connected to their casino in South Florida. So they placed like what was the big order at the time? But it was in a way, like the last I had seen of this Native American influence, because the company, and I kept forgetting them. Elliott Green was an important company to us because my grandfather met his wife. She was a bookkeeper at Elliott Green, way back when in the 20s, 30s. So there was always a certain closeness there, even though we were competitors and we had to all have our secrets. But they were really, when I started, they were the biggest company of the importers. But probably, toward my end, where I ended, Shipwreck Beads, Beadsmith, where I went, trying to think, and I'm sure checkbeads.com, who Hannah works with, which is Starman, were the biggest. And it was really, you know, one of the big transitions was really the breakdown of the Native American beadwork just sort of fell a lot. I mean, it was really just one of the big transitions. So during the, you know, so going back to where I was talking about and these gemstone beads, one of the big things was, you know, to keep up and having to keep up with all this change in the marketplace, would it be technology or cultural or whatnot, or casinos even, we had to just create new items. And one of the first things I started working with is creating my own glass colors where you can combine the cane. Now the hard part was you could only do what worked, you know, what worked where the glass wouldn't break. But if you go to the Hannah's pictures there was something there that says Grand Canyon colors, which was not the best selling colors, but those were colors that were basically came out of like two guys with not a lot of fashion background trying to put together our own collection of these multicolored beads. There was another line I could not find the chart called the Laguna line, which was
Hang on, let me get those Grand Canyon beads up for you.
Oh, you got that one? Okay.
Yeah. Hang on, let me just get that up for you.
Yeah. I
So,
sort of had to peruse a lot of my old material that was online and whatever I had. And that Grand Canyon chart I had in my records or in my photos at least. So let me know when you got it up there. But it became like this big adventure. You know, all of a sudden, you know, so Preciosa's calling themselves traditional glass beads. I'm gonna call myself, and these canes really are the ones that are there are all the canes that Preciosa makes. So those are all set formula glass cane. The one on my chart, Grand Canyon, are all taking basic canes, so basic solid colors, mixing them together and using perhaps what they call crocks, a little bit of glass scraps to create a little bit of a striping effect. So like, if you ever saw these multi-tone beads, you sometimes would find that every lot was never quite exactly the same, but we really did have formulas. So we often the reorders looked the same, but there were imperfections. But it was a really like a big deal for me. I mean, it was a big, just being able to like try to create this stuff. And I felt like I was behind the 8 ball at the time, as other people had worked with some new factories a lot sooner than me, because I was still, like, as I told you, more loyal to the Preciosa people. So it took a lot of trial and error, and we ended up creating many multi-tone colors. But also, I've been carrying these beads and have in front of my hand as small as I think a 2x3 millimeter to I think we got as big as like an 11x17 millimeter. Now they didn't all work. I think the 6x9 and smaller were the big items, but I really loved it that we eventually got to a 2x3 millimeter. I don't even know if they're made now. I know the 3x5 is made, and obviously you have the ones where they're called through cut, where the coatings are on the top and the bottom, and you can see the color in the middle. That just basically means that these were fully coated before they were faceted, and when they were faceted, the coating was cut through, and it took away the coating in the middle, left the coating on the top and the bottom, and the color in the middle. So that was the first main like bead binge I can really remember, where I was sort of on my own. Let's just come up with something. And even though it was based on Venice and all types of history, another one really was, I guess, starting to meet the bead stars of the world. And it was, you know, we, like I told you, we were dealing with Miriam Haskell and Liz Claiborne and people like that at the time. And you see there Carrie Slade, who's a bead worker from near Manchester, England. I think she's further off than that. There's Hannah and Helen Tang, and well, Laura McCabe, I think, became like my first big influence. Now, I think this is what attracted it. These peacock daggers, and these peacock daggers are around now, but I really went gung ho for them. similar to what I did with the gemstone fire polish. I started just doing them in any design possible. You know, obviously the dots. This was called a tie-dye look. But we also started mixing the glass with them. We tried different sizes, but this was really the main size. Carrie Slade made that crazy hedgehogs, which today she does not have a pattern for, as far as I know. I don't know how she did it. She says I remember her telling me some secret like, "Carrie, I'm going to do something," and I don't know how I did it, but and then she showed me those, and it was just there. And this all this peacock though. Well, two things about this adventure. It really became an entree where I got to meet Laura McCabe, where, before I was an import company, very distracted with, was I servicing a craft store? Was I servicing a jewelry designer? Was I servicing a bead store? I really did not know, but all of a sudden these names started coming into my life. Sherry Serafini, oh gosh, there's others. And of course, Maggie Roshek was somebody who helped me come up with the bead stud, which we'll get into later, I suppose. Also, gosh, Marcia DaCosta would come by. That was in one of the pictures there. That was Jean Power, who was friends with was it Diane? What was her name with the red hair? I'm forgetting that. She was from New York. Susan Golden. So just all of a sudden, like I was just getting to meet all these bead teachers. There's Helena Tang, and it really became from just, I guess, being willing to doing a lot of trial and error in life and beads, a lot of trial and error. And the peacock dagger was just another major thing for me, and I was able to go. I guess one of my last hurrahs was. I'm going to say I know I was the first one with the spike bead, the Czech spike bead. It was a 7x17 millimeter Czech glass spike bead. I had known Laura from some time now, and she had before that. I mean, she was the spike person, and I think one day I called her up and I told her about it, and she had her blessings. Though I feel I always felt a little sheepish about it, because the reason I had done it at that time, besides business being a little slow like any time, there was a street, the whole what was the whole look about 10 years ago where metal work was just big on beads. It was just the whole industrial look. There was a name for it, but the industrial look, and people were starting to wear spikes on clothing again. Oh, there was a name for a renaissance going on where people were
Punk.
What would you call it?
Steampunk.
Exactly, steampunk. So that steampunk look was just the end, and Laura's personality definitely fit the steampunk rage. I mean, and I got to meet Sherry Serafini, and she did the cover that I had there of the Pearl and Posy magazine. I got to go with that and Maggie Roshek's help, because we were sort of teamed together. I got to go to Hamburg for the Hamburg show for my own one and only time, and that was on the cover of the magazine at the time. And I got to me and my friend Yaramir, or my business partner Yaramir at the time, we got to introduce the spike bead to the world, not knowingly what we were getting into. The way I figured it, I remember I had a package by the dozen, and I'd admit I was selling it because I figured people only needed a dozen at a time. I was selling it for a bigger markup, assuming people were not going to buy this thing by the quarter kilo or anything or mass or anything like that. Mass is 1,200 pieces. Later on, Beadsmith, they had put it on the strand, where more value in the strand because the beads would go on both sides. But that became like this sort of whim where, different sizes of spikes, and then the gumdrop was totally like my idea. Just sort of, what else can I do? And it became a thing. And this is really when two-hole beading was just coming into its own. I think the Super Duo was invented around 2008. And the reason I mentioned that, I am still friend. The one guy I'm still friendly with in the Czech Republic is Daniel Matura, the inventor of the Super Duo. He runs the Motubo line of the beads. Actually, texted him today about something just to see how he was doing. We can get into that later a little bit, but it was, and I became. It was. It started out where I remember the Tila bead. The Tila bead was just this huge thing, and I remember Preciosa coming to me and saying they were going to have their own two-hole bead, because I brought it up to them, are you guys going to do anything two-hole? And I remember guessing it was going to be a rice shape. This rice, it just seemed to fit the rice shape. I didn't know anything else about it, and it ended up being what was called the twin bead, which was a very egg-like two-hole bead. Now, Rochelle, you had mentioned to me that two-hole beads did exist before, and I'm sure there was a whole history of two-hole beads, but I'd have to say from my experience, anything two-hole that maybe was done was perhaps a bridge bead that was just used to multi-stranded pearl necklaces, just used to separate or space multi-stranded pearl necklaces, or maybe something that had to do with sew-on jewelry. I don't think two-hole beads were ever made to this small size. So I think this craft was really a brand. I mean, this was a brand new craft. I mean, that was started with the Tila bead. So when that Tila bead came out, and then the twin bead came, we were definitely a weaker company at the time. Japanese seed beads were definitely taking over for Czech. People were getting their beads made overseas, getting their designs done overseas. For example, Miriam Haskell used to do production orders with me. And then by the end, they would do sample orders, come in, their intern for the summer would make something with our beads, and then they'd send it to China, get knocked off. And then that's how it worked. And that's just the way it was, but you took if it was $5,000 worth of business versus 500, you took it, it did not matter. So, I mean, this was going on, and that two-hole bead, I was not, because I was a fragmented company, I wasn't necessarily a big inventor of anything two-hole. I had come up with something called a Czech bead, which was basically a Tila bead with the holes the other way. It was not a good bead. So it was not a great thing, but you had asked about that industry, and somehow, that twin bead, Preciosa was onto the right thing. I mean, it was so much cheaper than the Super Duo bead, but somehow the Super Duo maker, he added that pinch, that bump on the top, which created that deeper nestling effect, and also the availability to do any coating you could do in fire polish or anything. And I think that just became the biggest two-hole bead of the Czech world. I know that so many others were, and some of them I think we try to forget about, because I know there's a period when I came to Beadsmith, from the day I entered there to the day I left, people were like, there were definitely people saying another two-hole bead. Oh, another two-hole bead. I'm trying to think of the different names out there of other ones. We had the Rula bead. We had oh gosh, this is where my memory is fading a little bit. What are the two-hole beads out there that are Czech? Someone must know.
There's so many. I mean, before the
Ones that
start
have
of,
names to you. What are the first ones that come into your mind that are with the seed bead work? The brick bead. The start of the checkmates. I'm sorry, the checkmates were really the first big grouping of beads. The checkmates. So the Starman checkmates, where he did the brick,
and the
the
bar,
brick, and he matched them. He had his own tile bead, and he matched them up. And really, it was a great, I think, a great advertisement of it. But it was becoming, and I asked speeders about it, and they just said it was just was a more secure way to attach your beads onto your product. I guess you could just get a lot more done. I mean, like I said, I didn't stitch a day in my life except for some simple string, maybe. So it just became a real big cultural change. And the funny thing is I ended up working at Beadsmith from from March of 2000 oh, March of 2000, I'm losing time. So in March of 2015, I think, and got laid off July 2019. And so when I first got there, obviously they had the Super Duo bead, and them and Starman were the biggest makers. But I remember just doing tons and tons of data work trying to find for them what they were missing in their work, like what they were missing in their selection based on what. And one of the things based on all this multi-tone glass things that I experienced of, one of the first big things I did for them, and I don't think there's any picture in there, was the Super Duo duets. Has anyone seen the Super Duos where there's one color on one side and one color on the other side, the main color being the black and white? Have you seen those? That was all for me. And me and negotiating with the Matubo guy. So the same way I had that gentleman Yaromir negotiate, I was just like, things that we could do. And one of the cool things about it was that white and the black was, you could get them coated so that the white was coated, say, purple on one side, while the black would just be like a bronze part. To me, it was just like, man, I think I got something here. And I remember showing it to, I think when we first got done and showing it to the Beadsmith crew, they it doesn't that they put that much, I mean, because the Super Duo was so strong for them, two-hole beating was strong. They were all believed that this is maybe something that we really, really got. And I gotta tell you, I think as the way my friend Daniel Matuba would say, he said the black and white was okay, but the rest became like a nightmare because we would dig covers like navy and beige and turquoise and beige, and it just with whatever extra price it was, it just didn't work. It just didn't quite work. It was okay. It was better than some of those crazy two-hole beads, but it just wasn't work. But the reason I was bringing that up was my last two-hole bead with them, and I guess I worked for Beadsmith for 4.25 years. I guess my title was product designer, product manager, check beads. I got to go on that one trip and it's funny, the trip was like literally a year before they laid me off. And the weird part is when I went to the Czech Republic with him on that trip, I could see the carnage of the business. And it was carnage for me because I could see the shrinkage. It hadn't shrunk like Venice had shrunk. It just was, there just wasn't as many, it just wasn't as many vibrant places you could go for me to see bees. Now, it's morphed, and it's gotten more, I suppose, retail oriented for the consumer, where you can go on tours and stuff, and you can find beads, and you can order beads from All Beads or whoever, sure, but that didn't exist when I went, I mean, people, they were just maybe starting to do, some of the bigger names like All Beads were just starting to consider doing the tours and stuff like that. So it was a big change for me. But the funny thing about the two-hole bead thing was the last thing I worked on, and this is where I'm getting a little bit private information. We had come back from the Czech Republic. We had come up with some stuff. We put some money into glass pearls. They didn't have a huge glass pearl selection. We had did some of those you had noticed that some of all the last biggest rage in Czech Republic are the table cut beads with the carvings on them. It'd be the flat tablet beads with carvings on it. We had done some, we'd done some of our own, but nothing too original from the trip. We had come up with a few things, but I guess the mermaids were big at the time. I'm not sure. This is like the summer of like 2018. And somehow someone put a picture in front of me of mermaid scales. Can someone picture mermaid scales? Where it's sort of like the little sea. Can you picture that? Little sea waves of mermaid, or you could go online and see mermaid scales. And I start negotiating with the same guy, the Super Duo guy, about these mermaid scales. And the next thing I know, that we have a sample of the ginkgo bead. And the weird thing about it was that two-hole beads were so big. Beadsmith had gotten a 3D printer, figuring that he could do 3D printing of shapes and perhaps test what they could work. The reason I bring that up is really, really very difficult in glass beads because glass just inherently breaks. It just doesn't. I don't think it necessarily works that way. And I think graphics were just enough way that you could communicate enough doing your own graphics. So really, one of the last things he sent us a sample of this ginkgo bead, which came from me just showing the guy. It was almost like a happy accident after we just come back from the Czech Republic and really hadn't seen anything adventurous. Like really, like this is good. This could be big or come with anything. And you could tell that two guys did this ginkgo bead because our spelling at Beadsmith was Ginko. And everyone else, if you look it up in the Webster dictionary, it's the spelling of the ginkgo is Ginkgo. So I believe Starman or checkbeads.com spells it with the Go and we spell it with the Ko. That all came from me, like it or not, like it or not. So that was my history of tool beads. But I guess ending the conversation a little bit and going into questions, I'm just going to show you. This was the love. Well, I wanted to show you a couple of things. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this at all, so I'm going to use a coaster here. This was the peacock daggers. Do you see the John Lennon image on my bead there? Can anyone see that? So just the one of the other like adventures I got into. I tried to get into at Beadsmith was the laser. I guess they called it laser printing. I guess peacock daggers in the end is basically screen printing on beads. Most beads that are available are flat because they have to lay flat for a design to be sharp. A dagger is flat. So basically somehow they put some type of screen printing over the surface. All the same coatings, would it be Betrayal, Aurora Borealis, Maria, Slipperate, whatever the coatings were, somehow slip the screen printing covers up the part of design that you don't want it to be. The bare design is the dots, or in this case, my John Lennon bead. And the reason I always say this John Lennon bead was my birthday is October 9th, the same as John Lennon. It's sort of a spiritual thing. And being in the bead business, you have some type of spirituality by nature. So I wanted to end with that point on the peacock beads. But one other thing, if anyone ever wanted to look up for a brief time there in the social media, I was anti-social media until I realized I needed it so badly. And I luckily came into Facebook at a time where, so it was very freeform, we'll just say. You can be very freeform, a little obnoxious, say what you want a little bit. It wasn't, the rules weren't as big as they were now, but one of my last hurrahs in the business were these things called age stripe seed beads. And I have a bead blog. If you typed in PB blog age stripe seed beads, it would come up. This is an age stripe here. The stripe beads were definitely a derivative of the trade beads and the Venice beads. And we always carried some at York Novelty. They ended up being, I think the biggest use of striped seed beads were really more for a Santeria, which was a religious purpose where people wore like a rosary. That was more from like Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, that nature. And that's probably the main reason why we had a lot of stock. But one of my last hurrahs was I took these beads, which were generally most common white with stripe, or yellow with stripe, were the most common colors. And then maybe there was a royal blue, a couple of royal blue green, and I got them coated. And literally in the beginning, I would send a flat rate box to the Czech Republic that would hold, I don't know, I think it was like 6 kilo worth of beads. And I'd send it to them in a flat rate box. It was something that was cheap at the time. It was only like cost me like $45, $50, but we would frost them and we'd get them made. And it was just really, of all the things I did, it was the most things that was sort of came from my initial background, the initial story I told you with trade beads, because in a sense, they look like trade beads. I was able to get rid of stocks. And this is really what everyone called hybrid seed beads in the end, because that's what Starman or checkbeads.com did, or anyone who did it with Toho beads or even Mayuki beads where you got them coated. It was all basically just sending the stock to the Czech Republic for them to be coated. And the reason I did it was really a little more desperate, or I figured I really couldn't put any money into new stock, so let's do something with the stock I had. So they would take these beads, they would mat them, and then they would generally put Picasso on them, and you had this sort of aged look. It looked sort of something like trade beads, and they really did get very popular on like Etsy and eBay. And somewhere along the line, we did at our last bead and button show some type of man's beadwork look. We got people used them. I mean, they had a very much of a Americana tribal thing to them, a little bit of groove, and it was probably my last, probably my last hurrah on my own. And I did work on those beads at Beadsmith too. He kept them. His different with his was he only do them loose and 100-gram bags, but somewhere he may still have a few left in his website. I don't know. I can't say what's going on there, but it was. There is a PBs blog which I basically told my story. I'm combining the trade beads to make these beads now, and even this one little Molly fire polish bead on this thing came from Carl Schimmel, if you know that name, CJS Warehouse in New York. He's one of the few people left from the last 20, 30 years where he basically buys and sells closeouts, and he let me take this bead from him, and I put it in one of my mixes at the time. I'm just looking through my I just happen to be peeking through my I am a gentleman in New York City, Midtown Manhattan, where I have like 4 jewelry boxes of beads. And then behind you, and you see on the wall, if you see on my wall, we have beads in the picture frames there. My wife has a Limoges collection from France. So it's sort of just a strange little thing. I mean, the luck of the bead man, I suppose. I suppose. I mean, it was just walked into this. But one of the weird things I found my last trip on my own to Czech Republic. This was before Beadsmith, so this had to be with the Hamburg trip. So that's that picture there up now. That's the super duo man Daniel Matura. That's all his stock. I said, "How do you know what's in stock?" He just pointed to his head. Still one of the few people doesn't have his stock on a computer. And one of the and that's a super duo bead or some type of 2-hole bead that's not polished yet. So that's before they're polished, before they're tumbled off. So that's a bead before they're tumbled off. That's just glass waste in that particular case, some glass excess waste. So maybe he'll recycle that. I don't know. That was just a boy being a boy, a weird sign. Argon. That was from his back window. He had the pool. He had a little pool. I always would joke with him. What are you doing with that pool? Is that where you clean the beads? What's going on? But this is in the mountains. That's him meeting my boss, Avi Weiss, in the Czech Republic. I mean, that's his warehouse right there. And that's his pool. Yeah, his pool's right there. So I mean, that's some of my last things in the bead business. This is just the views from the Czech mountains. Streets in the small town Pilsner. There's a lot of touristy pictures if you want to get to some bead pictures. Advertisements were always big there. You see the Preciosa advertisement. Oh, this is sitting at a table. I can't say what this was a reference to, but this was based on who we were sitting down to with. This was interesting to me because they do a lot of packaging, and it was just how they package rope tails for India. I just thought the artwork was sort of cool, just to show you when I say that beads are traditional versus beads that are fashion. I mean, India just has their tradition of making garments and their own religious fashion with beads as well. This is a Jablonec or Preciosa sea bead warehouse. All these are like bags waiting to get. So what would happen is you had to pre-order your beads so ahead of time. Nobody could take and spend and pay for every bead right away. So a lot of the beads would get stocked up in bags waiting for you to finish up your order. And then they would take these bags, and these are all based on different countries, every marking for a different country, a different vendor, and it would go to the stringer or the packaging department when they were ready to pay for their beads. More of the same. Oh, I can't remember. I guess something I saw. Can't remember this one, but probably says it all. So this picture is very famous for me now, because if you type in Jablonec or Preciosa traditional beadworks in the New York Times website, you get this picture. And I took the same picture as they took. This is the glass cane factory, the pressing glass cane factory where they're making all the cane. And you can read the whole article on the modern Jablonec. It must have been 6-7 years ago. down in the New York Times. And you'll see this is the first picture that will show up. The one thing about so this is their filming. One of the interesting things about Czech Republic is just their engineering expertise is really high. And one of the proofs is, you know, the car industry is the biggest employer of the bead region now, because Czechs just do all types of auto parts. They do tons of work for Volkswagen, which is not so far away. They make their own Skoda. Skoda is the Czech car. So they're just very involved, but they have all these little processes that they develop that does all this work with glass, that even some of it, you know, it's just, they just have a lot of little machinery that they've done. Very similar to Germany as well. So, I mean, the history of beads sort of went, you know, sort of migrated more toward Czech from Germany, I guess, in the more recent history. So this was just this is part of that famous picture, famous filming of them just, they're doing the glass rods there. We'll get another film where it gets a little more intricate. I think this one's a bad one. You can just skip that one. Oh, I think it was just a mistake. So this here is sort of how the beginnings of how glass rods are made. So the glass mixture is coming out as liquid out of the machine. They're balancing the liquid on these blocks. By the time, let's just say it's 50 yards or 30 yards, by the time it gets to the end, the glass is hardened long enough where the rods are broken off and they can take the rods out and they can use them. These are particularly CB rods, so they're sort of like pixie sticks, but there's holes inside, and they basically eventually get chopped and polished and made into your 10-0, 11-0, or 6-0 C beads. Bigger picture of the room.
We should probably start opening for questions pretty soon.
Oh, sure. This is the pixie sticks really up close. You can, I'll just go as you go. Them compiling the sticks for their stock. It was even Doris, I don't believe Doris can get access to this factory. It's the one thing, only dealers. So your Shipwrecks of the World or Beadsmiths or who else is out there? Harmon Beads, perhaps. Some could get access. John Bead. So this is a very rare to get these pictures. Don't tell anyone. So, and here you see them being balanced.
Because when I was
these are CB rods. These are not big glass cane rods, as the first pictures were, where I said the New York Times article. These are the CB rods. And that gentleman with the ball, he's Peter Push. He was like the figurehead. He's sort of the figurehead of the industry in the sense of the connection between the importers and the workers, in a sense.
This is true because when I was at Toho, they took us into this room and they asked us not to share our photos with anybody. So you guys are pretty lucky to be able to see these guys, these photos now of Preciosa.
I think I think there's videos online of fire polish making and press beading. Of the CB work, they're very limited.
Yes.
The CB making. And the weird thing about the CB making is every little process is a weird machine. They have weird machines that check for hole size, check for diameter. Just strange little machines. And most of it's just based on the past. There are a few upgrades based on technology and maybe automation, but this is a video or this is a picture. This is the video of the CB rods being made. I think this is pretty cool. And literally where we first started, the end of that, and they're cut at the other end of that. They're basically, the glass is hardened and they're cutting them off into canes, into these bundles of like pixie sticks that are going to be chopped with the C beads.
This is awesome.
I'm sorry?
I said, this is awesome. Thank you, Perry.
Oh, you're welcome. You know, I remember when I first got these photos, I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to share. You know, so I sort of put them in my, I think I shared very, very little online on certain things. These are all, there's a lot of sand is used in bead making, but a lot of, you know, there's different processes of color making. These could be helping make the color of beads. I'm not quite sure. But there's definitely, you ask why Czech Republic and glass, it's because of the sand mines in the area. They have tons of sand mines, just a lot of work with just the material itself. And I don't, you know, I don't know, because I wasn't the owner at the time, just the amount of footage I got here was what I could do, you know, and I was like, I could be a little bit more focused on it, as opposed, you know, I let him deal with the director or whoever he was dealing with. You know, still like all stringing CB, there's still, they have little machines, but a lot of it's still done with hands and needles. It's still, they had shown me on this trip and I couldn't take a picture. They had come up with a more complex stringing machine. I never know what happened to it. But this was at a, you know, this was at a decent business time. So this is 2018. There was definitely a decent amount of CB production going on. And I think the biggest issues CB factories have is capacity. Anytime they double capacity, it always comes back to haunt them, because all of a sudden then there's an economic downturn. They're almost trained to keep capacity low, lower so that demand is higher, and it takes longer in time for you consumers. I think it's just what's best for them, best what keeping. And right now there's just a lot of energy is a big trouble. The war in Ukraine, or which the energy crisis is going on. There's going to be a lot of escalation in prices, I imagine. You know, this is just not knowing much, but prices are going up. Just to say it politely.
So how many kilos of beads is in one of these giant vats here?
I couldn't say for sure, but about 30 kilo. But the weirdest thing was, though, when they're producing this in this very Willy Wonka factory way, he told me, like, literally from the start of production to the end, only 30% of the production is met the requirement. Like literally 70% is either goes back in the garbage or remelted, because there's to get it right with the machinery and to do it at such a high production, there's just so many processes. There's a lot of just waste, and they're okay with it. You know, white and black, obvious, are the main colors. Obviously, they want to carry as many natural colors as they can, but there's a lot of material and cost issues. Yellow, red, orange are sort of made at the same time frames, because yellow turns into orange, turns into red. They add different chemicals, but black is always used as a cleaning of the machine. So that's why you'll find there's always black, and you wonder why everyone keeps doing coated glass beads. Would it be New Starman colors or whatever the coatings are? It's just because it's more economically efficient, coating on white or crystal or black, because they're always being produced. It's very hard. You're welcome to Paulina. It's very hard to control the color outlet. Even when I left Beadsmith at the end, they had just told me they reduced their striped CB palette, you know, from 100 to like 30, you know, something like that, because they said it just was not accurate. This was a weird machine. It was a way of checking for sizes. Just a weird. They had tons of little weird machines like this, funnels and things that just check for uniformity. I mean, obviously uniformity mean everything for you guys, and just to give you an idea, this is how hard it is to get the uniformity gone. This is stocks of bead stick, bead pixie stick rods. Because I like the striped beads so much, I took a picture of that. And Hannah, our beads, this is where we were able to make our beads purple on the white here, and Hannah got to work with a bead that I got to do with that particular cane. These are white hearts, white hearts. So like the way you see the white center, so like the old traditional white hearts, which would be very rare to find in the factory now, I would imagine.
Probably.
Just general glass cane. So this is larger glass pressing cane, and beads are pressed, and then round drook beads become fire polish beads. So this is the beginnings of fire polish too. The pressing rods. I think that one because of Carl, because it's Carl. Carl is just always a hard color to get. Why colors are hard? It's usually because they use gold dust, disused materials, or uranium that are just either bad on the environment or something. That rose opal, another one. I had the penchant for difficulty. Just difficulty. This is a uranium glass color. The cool thing about this color is when you mixed it with other beads, when you made the multi-tone beads, it would give, like, say, sapphire, like a little like uranium glow inside, and create a really cool effect. So that's what people always like fascinated by uranium, and those people who have those detectors with uranium, because they created, I don't know what's legal or illegal now with uranium, but it became an issue. It was an issue.
Rochelle, they fluoresce under a black light.
Oh,
Okay.
cool. Right on.
Yeah. Very popular.
There's some rocks that we mine in Arizona, some calcite that actually glows green under the black lights as well. And so from certain areas. The food.
Rakowski, Rakowski, he's now a major figure of the molds, and he actually has his own brand. You can find him online. He's more openly selling to everybody now, and these are his molds that he makes. But he actually, secret is that he made the Super Duo mold for the Super Duo guy as a gesture because they're friends. so it's sort of like one of the hidden secrets there. So these are just all molds.
Gorgeous, thank you.
Yeah, tons of molds, and any of these molds, I guess, could be resurrected.
It's injected in the mold.
What is that?
The glass is injected in the mold and pressed.
So basically, the mold clamps down on the pressing. So the mold is pressing. So you may have the bottom of the mold clamping on the pressing machine. If you're just typing a trick glass pressing machine, I'm sure on YouTube. This was a pearl factory, I believe. So putting together all glass pearls are dipped from string, so they got to string them up before they. It was one thing that it was a little bit of a mystery to us when we left on this trip with Beadsmith, because we hadn't really focused on pearls much. So they call themselves wax dip, but they're basically all have to be strung on original stringing and dipped. So it was just interesting because we hadn't really known much about it. And yeah, get them putting them this is how they were putting them together.
And then they dip them in the coatings.
Yeah, they put them in the coatings, the dyes.
Oh. That's so cool.
So here's a guy putting the dye on it now.
Oh, okay.
Believe me, I had to go through it, and here's just one's drying. And again, the great thing about the dyed pearls is that you get your color you want for fashion. You can make a small production run. You don't have to worry. So there is a purpose for it, even though it's not for everybody. I mean, it can just save just have a purpose,
Mhm.
This was this Rosetta. I think Beadsmith got this. This was from that last trip where it was one of the beads we saw, and I think they did import it. I don't think it became anything of huge factor that I've seen, but it's a 2-hole bead.
Mm-hmm. They're out there, but there's not a lot in use.
Yeah, I worked on the cabochons with them and in general. And this is just color chart, nothing special, I suppose. But at the time, and everyone in the area who has a bead name has their van with their name on it. It's just sort of like billboard type advertising.
Oh, we need a Toho van.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone had their own van. Yeah. So this was meeting this was more fascinating. This was all like the screen printing peacock style, so things we were looking at. So I guess we before I left Beadsmith, I got to work on these flat drops and do some styles. So I'm trying to remember now.
You've done so many things in your life. What was your favorite?
Well, I guess I said the age stripes were very personal, but oh, I think though the favorite is just getting the meeting. You know, there's the process in the end. You know you're racking your brain and you actually do come up with something. You know, you imagine there's someone at Apple working on every little their earphones and something, and he's racking his brain. How do you improve something that you can't improve anymore? I guess it's sort of like that type of thing. You know, it's just racking your brain.
Yeah.
And like and finally coming. This was the Pearl Factory. I'm trying to remember what he was doing though. I forgot. These little machines that they have. It's all types of little machines that just keep things in order. And I recently talked to a factory called GB Bijou. I was speaking to her on some matter, and I asked her how beads are doing. You know, maybe beads are doing great. But she said, Perry, we have plenty of people involved. You know, we have plenty of people here working beads still. I mean, they're not losing all their jobs to the auto industry. She made it sound like there'll always be a bead business as long as glass is being made. You know, as long there'll be a bead business, and that's where I guess Precio's making the glass. So as long as there's glass, there'll be beads to be made.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
And that's the paint. This is all pearl dyes in this case. So I guess this was
Is that more screen printing?
so I think these are, well, we got toward the end with Beadsmith, I got some Tila beads made with, I guess we got Tila beads and we got maybe half Tilas made with the screen printing. I have a sample of Tila beads here. I think it's because of the price. It ended up being like, I guess I always said to myself, I've been involved in the vintage beads of tomorrow very much. Because what happens, and just to talk about vintage beads really quickly, is that what happens is some war breaks out or some technological mishap happens, and beads cannot be made at the same price anymore, and they aren't made anymore, and they go on to the next thing technically. So a lot of like what it become vintage beads just happen because of circumstance. They just can't be made anymore, and it's usually some economic or. This was just a small place, I think, who made fire polish beads, and these were their samples on the wall.
They're cute. They're bugles and fire polish making
Yep.
light.
Yep.
And so I love it. Oh, we need the long bugles again. So does anybody make the long bugles anymore?
I think they have it in their capacity to make, but I just don't think people are making them. So again, vintage beads. Anyone who does have some long bugles, I mean, they're vintage,
Right. So where's the best place to find vintage long bugles these days?
I really don't know. That's the problem. Any check vendor, you could ask them to check if there's any stock around. Yeah. So here, I didn't get to show you this. This was a white bead that was more of a tubular bead that I found on one of my last trips. The trip before I went to with beads in 2013, I was able to send it to back for coating and just get it made in like a marbleized color. It was just a white, and it was typically what you find on chandeliers at the end. So yeah. So really, it's just a strange, it's a strange, what do you call it? Strange trip it's been, type of, speaking of the Grateful Dead, type of bead thing. Obviously, following the money often, and dealing with restrictions. We had a union a good part of our time. It was, but had a lot of good opportunities as well. So it was, it's just you have to move on, I suppose. I guess I've been out of the business now from, it's from July 2019. I talked to a few talking to contacts less and less, just the way it is. It's because and I don't want to hear about their strikes too much. And I worry about the smaller makers like the Super Duo guys. Really, it's a hard time now. Suddenly, beginning of COVID, he said business was good. Business was good. I guess there was just a lot of crafting being done at home. I think he said the first half of this year took a really big hit, is what he said. Now getting a little better.
Back out to life and aren't as beating so much. But it's, so what are you doing now? What would you like to do with all this wonderful knowledge and
I'd
experience?
like to do more stuff like this, but you know what I'm doing now? This could be, I work at 5 blocks away, Bed Bath and Beyond. I work about almost 40 hours a week just to keep myself busy. It was great during COVID for the community, and I saw so many things of Perel, you know, and you keep in touch with things, but also a lot of nonsense. I mean, I really thought about, is there any way of just having a small little import workshop place where I could sell Etsy? I just think it's run its course for me, unfortunately. It's part age. I mean, health is okay, but you know, we all have lingering, whatever it be, bad knees or whatnot. You know, so actually the good great thing about the job is I stay fit. I stay fit. You know, I decided I didn't want to sit. I figured I had 2 options at a job. I'd be sitting at a desk doing data work where I'm not the greatest typer, because I was doing a lot of that at Beatsmith, or I could just do something I could relate to, but doing basic retail, basically.
Wouldn't want to lead any check tours or anything like that?
You know, it just wasn't my, I would do if I did it, it would be a one-time thing, and I'd have to be a special occasion. Like where we're doing it for our families as well, I guess, or something like that. Because I talked to my sister about, you know, she wanted to go. She comes from the art field, and she'd love to go and see it. And I'm sure my wife would go to see it again. My wife's mad at me because she says I got the time. I told her it would start at 7, and then I said, well, maybe it'll start a little bit earlier. But she's staying at the office. She thought she was gonna come home early. But she actually, my wife, at her peak, she learned peyote stitch, a few stitches. She took it at the she took it from one of the teachers here, or took it at the New York Bead Society or something. But the funny story is like she once, I guess, went to like a meeting, you know, a meeting like you're having now, and she had a tackle box of beads, and everyone was saying, why you have all this good stuff? And they find out who her husband was, and I think ever since then it wasn't as fun for her, because she always had like I was showing Hannah my kid who was 19 at the time with a friend of his. They were jewelry stringing last summer, and the friend was telling me, you know, simpler stuff, but she said it was very big on social media, people stringing. I just think, you know, we have some type of disconnect as well as we have a connect. You know, where as a business, it's hard to, you know, I watch like Candace Cooper all the time. I say, where does this girl get this energy? You know, and doing it. And I remember how hard it was for me to just keep up with social media, keep up with computers as it was. I mean, so, and again, that's a whole nother topic. If you ever, you could do a topic just on how technology has changed business. You know, as simple as that, and get a forum of people. And you could have one right there and have a quick discussion.
Obviously, we're meeting from all over the world right now on Zoom, and it didn't exist before the pandemic.
Right.
I'm really thankful
Yes.
that our technology has improved, so our beading connections can, you know, get the world together again.
Yeah, I worry, but I wonder like what the palette of, besides your basic sea beads and such, what the palette of sea beads are today, because there's certain things, you know, like I hear, you know, that seem like they're going to disappear. It's because they're not going to be made anymore. And there's certain things that may be new that will be made. So it's hard to say.
Yeah. And so, well, beads connect us. That's definitely for sure. And it will remain to do so, I think. And we really appreciate it. Are there any other questions out there from you guys for Perry? You can unmute and ask him. I know we've covered so much.
Well, I hope you got something out of it. You brought back memories from me. So I hope you did.
And so, yeah, we have lots of people thanking you, and they want to know how big your bead stash is. We know your price is
like equivalent of about a dozen shoe boxes.
Oh, that's all?
Well, I'm in a New York City apartment. It's not that much, because like really, my dad taught me. He said to me, Perry, we cannot collect. We have to pass it on to the customer. You know, our job was to pass it on to the customer. So I mean, and when I got my collector's eye, it was already like, you know, over halfway into the whole thing. So I don't, you know, you don't need that much. You know, to have one strand of beads is not that much. I wish there were certain things from my career I kept just to have a little more of a history of what I did. but so say la vie.
Well, they're still
I,
out there.
just one strand, I took this strand, Jaylee, just to, it was one of my favorite strands of beads because early 90s, I remember these being available, just a color red, and someone African trader probably strung them up. And you know, I found them years later. I got them from someone years later, and just the thing that just not, I know it can never be made again exactly like this anymore because just the color of the color of the glass, the size of the bead, the time it's going to take, the polishing. It's just certain, you know, when someone asks me what's the vintage beads, everyone's got millions of interpretations, time, everything. But I just think when something cannot be made anymore, to me it's vintage, or cannot be made like that anymore, it's vintage.
That's a very good
You know,
definition.
if you say 10 years or 20 years, you're not, it's not the whole story, I don't think. So
Oh my
yeah.
God. That's- Thank you so much. We've
You're
been
welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. Like I said, I wasn't here to sell anything, so that's also like a relief in a sense.
right. Well, sharing your knowledge is really, really, really so precious to us because that's
Yeah, I'd like to hear what's going more, and some other time, maybe you said I'll be able to go into other meetings, hearing what's going on in the bead business or bead world more, because I have shut myself off. You used to be able to just turn on Facebook and people posting, and you can sort of tell, get a vibe that's going on, but you can't really know, you know. So
it's hard. Yeah, Bead Fest in Lancaster is going to be a big show this summer. So I think that they're starting to come back. A glass bead show is going on in Milwaukee last weekend. So I think that the shows are coming back for real, and hopefully the inspiration and the creativity.
yeah, but just remember how that translates to the manufacturing doesn't always work out because it's a business where scaling is very important. The better the volume, the lower the price, but the limitation on what you can do. That's why coatings are so important and such. So it's just not always the reason you're wondering why. It's always an economic reason. It's always an economic reason. So
Well, thank you for inventing so many beads.
okay.
I've only been about
You're welcome.
2005, and I
Thank you,
remember the
everybody.
elevation of this.
All right, and keep on beating, as they say.
Everybody. So thank you for joining
Thank
us,
you.
everyone. And just so I don't forget,